Special rapporteur David Johnston spoke about foreign interference into our federal elections. He held a news conference on Parliament Hill for the release of his first report. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, David Johnston is advising against holding a public inquiry into foreign interference. Is the government maybe trying to cover up something here?
Well, that's going to be the allegation, whether they are or they aren't, because the public needs to know more information. And David Johnston, who never should have taken this appointment in the first place, has come out and said there shouldn't be a public inquiry. Too much of this information can't be released publicly, but we can have some public hearings. And I'm the guy to keep investigating. Now, why did I say David Johnston shouldn't have taken this appointment in the first place? Something he was asked about. As soon as the questions started in his news conference and he addressed them, I don't think he addressed them sufficiently, and that is his connections with the Trudeau family. Going back to when Justin Trudeau was a young boy, and the Johnston family and the Trudeau family used to go skiing together. Pierre Trudeau would drive into Mont-Tremblant, park his car at the Johnstons. They'd get together, they'd go skiing, they'd have events together. Sometimes David Johnston would drive the Trudeau boys back to their mothers if their dad couldn't and had to go to Montreal. He's known him that long. He's known him while he was a student at McGill, and David Johnston was the principal of McGill University. He's known him as the prime minister. He's described him as a family friend. In interviews when he was governor general, he never should have taken this appointment. And then he also has strong ties and connections with China. The investigation is about China's election interference. Here's a guy who described how at home he felt in China. It feels like I'm back home when I'm here, he said on one of his trips when he was governor general. He wasn't the right guy to do it on this report, and he's not the right guy to keep doing the investigation. But this is what we are stuck with.
Now, Brian, prior to the report coming out, former Tory leader Aaron O'Toole wrote up a description of his meeting with Johnston that raised some interesting and disturbing questions. What did O'Toole think?
Well, O'Toole pointed out that by the time Johnston met with him, and why is it important that he meet with Johnston or meet with Aaron O'Toole? He's not the leader anymore. He was the leader during the 2021 election. And that's one of the elections where there's allegations of China trying to interfere, that several ridings were targeted. And so Aaron O'Toole would have information. They didn't talk to anybody else at the party. They didn't talk to anyone else on O'Toole's team. They came to talk to him. He raced to put together a binder of evidence of things that they had presented previously as problematic. Johnston wasn't interested in it. And by the way, he only set up the meeting after his report had been written and sent to translators. That's, by the way, the same time that he wanted to meet with Pierre Poilievre. He'd already written his report. He talked to the Bloc leader about election interference in British Columbia and Ontario ridings. Last I checked, the Bloc Québécois does not run candidates in either of those two provinces.
Brian, last week the Parliamentary Budget Office issued a report on the upcoming clean fuel regulations, often called Trudeau's second carbon tax. It found that Canadian families will be paying a lot more for energy than we're getting back in rebates. How much more are we talking about here?
Well, for some Alberta families, it could be, if you're in the top 20% of income earners, you could be looking at paying almost $1,200 more per year just with this carbon tax. On the price of a liter of gasoline, it's going to increase the cost by 17 cents. So Pierre Poilievre had pointed out that when you add the current carbon tax, the extra 17 cents, and then the HST charged on top of both of them, it's an extra 61 cents a liter in extra taxes due to Trudeau's carbon tax that goes on the price of gas. That's by 2030. The government is trying to dispute it, but the facts are there. The numbers are there for people to see. If you're at the low end, you're probably, bottom 20%, you're not getting rebates on this. You're going to be still paying an extra couple $100 a year. People in the middle, when you combine the new carbon tax and the old carbon tax, you're looking at about $2,000 a year. So on the upper end, you're looking at multiple thousands between the two carbon taxes. If you're in the middle, you're looking at about a couple $1,000s extra by 2030 that you're going to be paying and not getting extra services from. This is not a tax where you're going to get something back. So it's something that Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, said if he gets in, he will scrap this clean fuel regulations, also known as carbon tax 2.
And we'll hold him to that. Brian, now the Trudeau government actually snapped back at the PBO and tried to undermine his report. Didn't our Prime Minister used to say he believed in supporting officers of Parliament?
Yeah, oh no, you can't question officers of Parliament. You've got to believe everything they say. Look, that's not actually my position. I believe that auditors general often step out of their lane. You know, they have clearly prescribed jobs. I remember the first parliamentary budget office and budget officer. I felt that he had been co-opted by the opposition parties. You know, that's not something that you can say for Yves Giroux, the current holder of the office. And so his reports are getting increasingly criticized by the Trudeau government. You know, this is the government that says no one should be like Donald Trump, and yet they attack the integrity and the abilities of public office holders, of senior civil servants. They even attacked a journalist in the House of Commons last week as they were getting questions on safe supply of drugs. So they're attacking civil servants, they're attacking journalists because they don't like the messages that are coming out. This from the government that wants to put an end to misinformation and disinformation. They want legislation to do that. They want to control what's online. No, I don't buy that idea, because look at what happens when these guys get a report they don't like.
Brian, a newspaper in Italy referred to our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as a buffoon recently. This follows his meeting at the G7 in Japan. Why would they call him a buffoon?
Well, I think the subheadline was something to the effect of "They want to lecture us," and they had the picture of the Prime Minister in blackface. This is because he had a meeting with Italian Prime Minister Minoli, and he started lecturing her on LGBTQ rights and saying, you've got a bad track record on this. One of the issues at play is that the Italian government has told municipalities, which collect key data such as births, and they register births and issue birth certificates, to only include biological parents on birth certificates. And that's what Trudeau was taking issue with. Japan, meanwhile, and so he's lecturing her on this, and she looks very disturbed by the lecture in a photo that was released. Japan, meanwhile, doesn't allow same-sex marriage. There was no similar lecture for the Japanese Prime Minister. There was no photo with Trudeau, tearing a strip off of him. The Italians have a right to be outraged at how Trudeau's behaving, because once again, he's mansplaining. He's mansplaining to a woman how bad she is, not doing the same thing to a man, and trying to show that he's high and mighty. No, he's a hypocrite once again.
Now, you talked about a journalist who recently wrote an extensive piece on the government's drug policies, specifically handing out what's called a safe supply in Vancouver. You referred to that earlier. What did this journalist discover?
It was a guy named Adam Zivio, writes occasionally for National Post, and a very long, extensive piece looking at safe supply. And this has been backed up by reporting from other media outlets, local TV outlets in Vancouver, going on the street and buying up this replacement drug for people on opioids, and finding out that, the addicts are given it, they sell it on the street to get fentanyl. And they were willing to sell it to TV camera crews going around. Zivio talked to doctors who said, look, this may have worked in theory, but it's not working in practice, and this is going to lead to bad outcomes. What we've done in Canada, Hal, is that we've embraced this very ideological liberalization policy when it comes to hard drugs. And this has been tried in places like Portugal, and people rave about the success of Portugal, because they decriminalize the drugs and they're treating drug addiction as a public health issue and not a criminal issue. Here's the difference. In Portugal, they expanded treatment. In Canada, we're just giving people drugs. If you are caught breaking drug laws in Portugal and you refuse treatment, you go to jail. In Canada, we just say, let's decriminalize, and now let's give them the drugs as well and hope for better outcomes. This is madness on every scale. They are not heading in the right direction on this.
Wow. Brian, the federal government has offered the assistance of Canadian military in the fight against the wildfires. Any other federal help coming not just for Alberta, but also for British Columbia and Saskatchewan, as all three provinces are battling blazes? I mean, here in Alberta, we have over 2,500 firefighters battling the wildfires in central and northern Alberta.
Yeah, they don't really have federal firefighters for that, but they will offer resources such as the military. They will offer other assistance as the province asks for it. I know that just the way our federation works, the province does have to ask. So each individual province will have to say, here's what we need. And as long as the federal government has those resources and is able to provide them, under every government I've covered, it tends to happen very quickly. It's not a partisan issue. You don't normally find fights between levels of government on this, and it's a well-oiled machine. These fires are happening a lot earlier this year. And speaking to friends across the prairies in northern British Columbia, people that I know, it's hitting them a lot harder. It's hitting people's ability to breathe, depending on how close they are. There are some days are worse than others. It's hitting farmers. This has not been a good season. And I think the only thing that might have slowed people down or caught them off guard is how early this is happening this year.
And, a lot of investigations are going to be rolled out as well, and charges being laid against those who deliberately set some of these wildfires. Not all of them are caused by Mother Nature. Brian, we have our Alberta election coming up in less than a week. What are the most recent polls suggesting right now?
Tight race. And there was an Abacus data poll released the other day. I think it was a 3-point lead for the UCP. That's within the margin of error. And it also showed that on everything, the population was divided. Which one's the more risky party? Which one's the more risky leader? Which one do you like? It's almost an even split. And so here's where you get into odd bits of saying, well, it'll definitely be a UCP victory or it'll definitely be an NDP one. I don't think we know for sure. If you were to ask me to guess, my best guess would be the UCP still wins. And who gets out the vote, who gets people out to the advance polls this week, that's going to be important. You want to get people out to the advance polls because they can't change their mind if something else happens in the next few days to upset them and have them either switch to the other party or not vote. So my best guess would be a UCP win. But we often talk about how pollsters will get the conservative vote wrong in much of the country because people don't want to tell pollsters that they're voting for the Conservatives. In Alberta, there might be a hidden NDP vote because it's so divided and people are so angry at each side. They're both angry at each other that people might not be willing to say exactly where they're voting. I think, I don't think there's going to be a big surprise. The UCP could run away with it. It could be razor thin. The polls have been back and forth over the past couple of weeks, I think, because Albertans have been back and forth. Those swing voters in Calgary that both Danielle Smith and Rachel Notley are fighting for, they're having a tough time making up their minds. Still a decent number of undecideds, and we'll see if they vote.
Yeah, it just seems like Edmonton is going to be going NDP, rural Alberta, UCP, but Calgary seems to be the true battleground still. My hometown of Calgary, Ralph Klein country. Who would have thought that it would be that tight in Calgary?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. And the Abacus poll, which is the latest one that I've seen, it did have a slight lead for the UCP in Calgary, and so they have to be happy with that. Are they able to get the vote out? What's working in their favor and against the NDP is older voters. There was a wide margin of preference for the UCP. Younger voters, wide margin of preference for the NDP. In the middle, a bit more even. So, older voters more reliable at making sure they get out to cast a ballot. 18 to 29, some of the most unreliable voters. But Alberta is also the youngest province in the country when it comes to age bracket. So you got a lot of people in that age category, more than in other provinces. All of these factors at play. Sitting there trying to do the calculations in my head as I look at these numbers, Hal, and you guys are going to have a fun night next week.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We'll bring all the results here on Bridge City News. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you.